The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Brian for Breaking Down Security. This week is part 2 of our discussion with Security Sphynx on what your company needs to know when implementing ZeroTrust. As you may have heard us talk about the previous week, there's definitely some hurdles, some things you need to look at when you're implementing that, some of the pitfalls involved. And I think we go further into that this week, talking about things like what happens if your CIO or CISO come in and say, hey, this is something we should implement. I saw this in a magazine, or, the power behind that, because, you're needing to have a champion, maybe higher up to implement something as important as this for your environment. We also talk about, doing things like incident response with this, or, phrasing this as not as a way of removing security or increasing security hurdles or something like that. Trying to frame it in a different way so that others will be more on board with it. One example we give is with the salespeople, to give them more freedom instead of having to be shackled to the VPN. Gives them more alacrity, gives them more opportunities. When we all start traveling again, or when you're on a site with a customer and you can't access something, the idea is that this would give you more alacrity, more ability to be more agile in your different processes, and likewise using them to help you sell that internally to the company. Finally, we talk about things like business continuity, disaster recovery. And how we can use this to show metrics and performance in your environment, whether or not it's mean time to being back up or whatever. So we talk about a whole bunch of things, but those were some of the highlights of part 2 here. We hope you've enjoyed part 1. If you haven't gotten it, go back a week and grab it. And thank you all for listening, and hope you have a great week. All right. I'm sorry for the digression here. We kind of got off. So you mentioned getting support and buy-in. Those are some of the blockers, obviously. I think the politics there kind of goes back to some of the change management stuff that we've been talking about earlier with, helping create awareness, desire, giving people knowledge to do things like the ad car model, which we talked about, or have talked about, and things like our book club and whatever. So, if the scenario, like you mentioned, your CISO comes in or your CIO comes in and says, hey, I read about this in a magazine, can we implement this? You have somebody up high enough who can help get this pushed through if they're really, really wanting this. But maybe they don't understand that there may be money, there may be technology buy, there may be, other non-moving or resistance people who are going to be involved in getting that. And you said it comes back to culture. Is it a culture of people who actually want to do the right thing? Or if it's just, we're doing fine right now, we don't need to do anything. Why do we need to make this change? Well, CIO said he wants it. Well, we don't care about the CIO. VPN's working great. We don't need to do this thing. So
I think it actually, there's a good opportunity there when you've got somebody in an executive position or a C-level position, or even better, a board position, who is all of a sudden ZeroTrust is their favorite new tech buzzword for the week. Strike while the iron is hot, but do so responsibly. If you, right. A lot of people, I think, want to be like, oh yes, I could absolutely do that for you. We're going to do the best ZeroTrust ever. I don't think that's the approach you need to take. I think you need to be prepared proactively. Have a list of the things that you would need. And it's similar to the list that I put down here. Like, what are you doing for IT hygiene? Do you know what your legacy assets are that are potentially going to be a problem? How does human resources factor in? How are you handling onboarding and offboarding? Do you have the talent to implement this? Know what technologies are on sort of your wish list if you've got things that are missing. Know asset lifecycle. Be able to go to that executive when they say, I want ZeroTrust, and say, great, so do we. Here's some thoughts on a couple of things we need to do on that path.
Right. Right. And have a realistic timeline for that. Don't, tomorrow is never going to be the right answer. Taking stock of what you have in your environment. You're mentioning down here on your requirements, MFA is a must. It's not perfect, but it's one more layer in efficacy, and then have discussions around real RBAC before implementing a solution. Having all of that information, having that, and I'll come back to the RBAC thing in a second, but having those things already planned out, and maybe reaching out to maybe a good test bed, like we talked about breaking this up or making it a phased approach. Have an idea of who would be a good candidate for implementing this first. Maybe an organization that is maybe not operationally significant in the group, so you can help work through an easy implementation. If you've got data scientists or something like that, them data scientists, they tend to have all of their data in one place, right? Elasticsearch or Notepad or something. So, they should know where all of their data is. Maybe they're a good place to start. Maybe you can identify a couple of groups or a group that would be able to make that phased approach and a proof of concept work in that respect.
Well, and that has two benefits to it. I'm a big fan of find your you can call them guinea pigs, but don't tell them that. Call them champions.
Champions, right.
Find people in various departments that are relatively technically savvy enough to explain an error message to you, and get them excited about, hey, do you want to get a sneak peek of some new thing that we're rolling out? And let them be part of that solution, because they also, not only do you get that sort of ring zero test bed, but you also get buzz that can be generated about, oh, wow, this has made it so much easier. I don't have to get on the VPN. I can access this new app from whatever.
Yep. Yeah. And, keep your incident response folks like Mr. Betcher in the loop, so that if something does go pear-shaped, he and his team know what's going on when that happens. So, oh yeah, they're testing the new ZeroTrust stuff. Okay, we need to get a hold of these people and get them online. So, all right. So let's go back to number 2 here. It says have discussions around real RBAC, and you put real RBAC. I'm assuming real is not some kind of acronym,
No,
like you mean like, but we already have RBAC, role-based access controls. Everybody has that. When we log in, we're a member of the server local admin group. And,
exactly.
We have access. We have role-based access control. Everybody's our local admin. We're good.
When everybody's a domain admin, nobody gets permission errors. That is very true. But that's, so it's just like with kids, with employees, with security controls, it is far easier to give people more than it is to take it away once they've had it. Right. So design your RBAC from the ground up in a least, because ZeroTrust is all about, it's like principle of least privileged elevated. It is the next iteration of sort of that least privileged mindset. And you really do need to say, what is the absolute minimum someone needs to do their job? If they only need to view reports, then don't give them write access. Like there's no need for it. It's opening up additional vulnerability for no benefit. And when you're talking about this VPN-less world outside the perimeter, where the endpoint is the perimeter, you have to take that seriously. Being sloppy with your RBAC can really work against your ZeroTrust efforts.
Right. So how do you phrase that? It's like, yeah, I mean, is it just sitting down with them and shoulder surfing that person and go, okay, in a normal day, you're, 90% on your browser, going to 15 documents or, checking email. I mean, the vast majority of people don't need access to everything, obviously. So how would you find that? Is it shoulder surfing? Is it, asking questions or surveys? Because I know a lot of people don't tend to answer surveys, well, at least in my world.
What do you need to do your job? Everything.
Yeah. What do you need? Yeah, everything. Exactly. And so, I mean, what does that look like? Do you actually have to sit down with them and understand that in that respect?
So again, I'm becoming a parrot when it comes to culture. But get their leadership involved. You need to get business unit owners to tell you how they're part, because like I'm IT security, I have no idea what marketing's workflow looks like. I'm not qualified to. So I need to sit down with, some head managers or some directors in marketing and say, talk to me about, and don't phrase it as a, how can I lock down marketing? Phrase it as we want to give you more increased freedom to not have to be chained to the VPN. Can you list for us the specific attributes that you need to get your job done? And let's do a test phase of just this access. Okay, cool. We found 5 other things we missed. We'll add those to the list. But let that be an iterative approach and give it to them as a benefit. Like if you're willing to help us tighten these controls, we're willing to let you travel the world and do your marketing stuff.
Right. That's a good thought. If, sales and marketing, when I worked at my endpoint security company friends, they would have been the prime candidate, not just to be implementing ZeroTrust, but to help you sell ZeroTrust to other organizations and groups. If you can help them realize, better functionality or what have you, they can often repay you by helping to sell the internal product or the internal initiatives to other groups by helping you with your messaging and stuff. So a lot of us security folks think that they're kind of against us, but their job is to help push product or to sell a product to people who are often resistant to these kinds of things. So, getting their feedback on this, where it's like, make it more appealing instead of, oh, we're just taking away all your stuff and we're going to screw everything up, because there's a lot of folks out there, are resistant because of fear. They need to be able to do their job. If they can't do it, then, they're going to miss deadlines and what have you. So, getting them to help you massage that message to build that out can help reduce resistance. So you can use your sales and marketing and PR folks in ways like that. So
it's definitely, I think, a little bit of a marketing campaign there, because
right.
I think a lot of people in multiple departments view security and security efforts as, like, oh, good cop, bad cop, or whatever. But security is not there to hinder your workflow or to police you or to view your web traffic history. We have way more to do. We are there to make sure that you can do your job without increasing risk to the company. So help us help you.
Right. Exactly. So Mr. Betcher is big into incident response. If you implement ZeroTrust, how does that affect gathering forensic information, collecting logs, all the things that Mr. Betcher, I'm sure I'm missing a few things here, but it's like, how do you monitor assets in a ZeroTrust environment? Do you not have to have the machines that are logging in be trusted to like an overall kind of, monitoring dashboard? I mean, can you, you're writing logs to Splunk, so everybody will have access to your Splunk implementation, I would imagine, to at least write things. So how does logging and monitoring and incident response work when you've implemented ZeroTrust?
So I think it depends. And again, I don't work in incident response. Yeah, totally. It's culture. It's all culture. I think, though, you've got multiple layers there as well. Do you need as many logs for, and I think people love to just throw all the logs at a data lake and say, we have logs for everything, but that's useless to you if you haven't tuned it. So how much were you getting out of that logging to begin with? Question one. And I'm a huge advocate of logging, but you need to know what logs you're sending where and know that they are of value to you. Do not send noise into Splunk. That's expensive. Right. That said, nobody wants to hear this, especially when it comes to anybody who does endpoint management, but it oftentimes comes down to an agent. Like, if these are going to be off network, off VPN, it is a necessary fact of life that you're going to have some kind of agent on the endpoint that is reporting back health or reporting back telemetry or reporting back logs. So, that path, I think, still has to be there. I don't know that we have changed that particular solution, but there are some options out there, I think, that do streamline it. You'd have to that's a hard question to answer, actually.
Yeah.
There are some applications that you can buy, like the antiviruses, the EDRs, and even some free tools that incident responders can access the endpoints through, right? So by having access to that tool, you also have access through that tool to access endpoints and get the information that you need. So in that respect, the incident responders can have the ability to access a wide array of endpoints as part of their job.
Because I think that's an important thing to pick up on. You don't want to secure people out of being able to do their job, and that includes your security team. You cannot say that your network is secure and under control if you don't have real-time control and access to it. So when the endpoint's online, on VPN or off VPN, wherever in the world it is, somebody in your IR needs to be able to reach that endpoint reliably. And I think that's valid.
So I'm trying to visualize, does that not break zero trust? If you are not trusting the endpoint, but you're requiring your IR teams to be able to remotely access those non-trusted endpoints, does that, is there something on the endpoint that is going to authenticate that IR person who you're not supposed to trust in the first place? I'm just making my brain break, I think, but
well, there's trust usually established, right, between the agent and its home base, whatever, be that a software as a service or be that a server in your data center or what have you. Those agents have trust between each other. And so if your IR has authenticated to whatever dashboard or console they use, and that service has authenticated to its agent running on the endpoint, and they've established trust, and you've got RBAC around that so that only that IR team can access that and take that sort of direct connection to the endpoint, that's just another flavor, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know why the communicative property of math keeps coming up, but it's like you just mentioned, if A trusts B and B trusts C, then A trusts C in this case.
Only when it goes through B.
But only when it goes through B, right? But yeah, so that okay, that makes sense.
Right, and in this case, the endpoint itself has to trust the agent, right? And the only way that the incident responder can access the machine is through that agent trust model.
Right. Okay, so this is all well and good, and we're going to set up zero trust. What are the downsides? Because that's something I could not get from the company that I had talked to earlier. It was a bit of, almost like, I just work too hard. That's one of my negatives. I just work too hard. What are the downsides of implementing zero trust? This cannot be like, once we get it good, everything's perfect and everything's great. Something has to, there is a downside to this somewhere.
Sure.
It can't just be nice.
So culture. This is going to become the culture podcast. It is a change for a lot of businesses. This is something that is very different from how they want the freedom, but they don't necessarily want that extra MFA prompt to come up on their phone, or they don't necessarily have to request access and wait for it to be validated. It's a little bit of growing pains there. And so that's where having that sort of internal guerrilla marketing of how good this is going to be when everybody can work from their cabana on the beach, when they're working in some tropical place.
Yeah.
You're giving them that freedom. It's been a long time since I've been on vacation, man. I'm ready for a cabana on the beach.
I hear you 100%.
But I think that's step one. It's hard because you've got to get buy-in. It's hard because you've got to get people to want to be a part of this solution and not just get frustrated because it's different and want to go back to the old way. Secondly, it's hard because IT hygiene is hard. It's 2021. We've been doing this for a long time, but every single company in the world struggles with those basics of knowing that your network access is good, knowing that your endpoints all have healthy AV clients running on them, knowing that your patching is reliable. Like if I went to any company in the world and said, tell me right now exactly how many endpoints you have and how many of them you've patched that are, within 30 days of patch aging, very few people can say with any degree of certainty, where that sits. So that's hard work. And there's always a fire to put out. There's always a new project that's their golden project that's going to get all the attention and all the funding. And so you don't have time, quite frankly, to do the stuff of let's inventory our data, let's inventory our applications, let's clean up Active Directory because there's stale accounts and service accounts that we don't even use and they're floating around like just ready to be compromised. You have to be realistic about the manpower expectations and about the fact that if your team doesn't have that talent already, you're going to have to hire for it, or you're going to have to bring in contractors, and that has a cost. So it's not free, and it's not zero effort. ZeroTrust is not $0. It's not zero effort, and it does require an overall mentality change from the top down.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, I was going to ask about, okay, so we've got this implemented. What are the downsides? But then what's the hygiene look like? What kind of questions do we need to ask, upcoming vendors? Let's say we're going to put in a brand new SIEM for whatever reason. We didn't have a Splunk or whatever. What are some of the technology questions that we need to be asking third-party vendors when we go to, look for a potential new piece of technology? Is it like, do you support? I mean, it seems to me like, do you support SAML or OAuth or, that kind of, function? Can your system integrate with our authentication system? What is it? Am I missing anything other than just the AAA kind of stuff? Or is there other bits there?
I think one that I used to get when I was in a position where I was talking a lot more to vendors instead of being on the vendor side. Don't tell me that your solution requires domain admin to function. Do not tell me that. If a company comes to you and wants to sell you an agent or a piece of software and says, oh, but by the way, you have to give it a service account and the password can never expire and it has to have domain admin, I don't believe you. I call bullshit. Right. I think that is probably one of the bigger things that you can implement a gorgeous ZeroTrust solution. But if you're still putting in software and it's not that it requires that level of permission to function, it's that somebody was lazy when they were writing the technical manuals for it and didn't want to troubleshoot the granular permissions that it actually needed. So if somebody gives you that as an answer, push back on it, find another vendor. Don't accept that, oh, well, I need domain admin to run this like print service.
Yeah. Yeah. My worry is that, and I've seen this with, working in government, working in finances, you start building out the ZeroTrust stuff. And then you find out, well, this, like with the legacy stuff where we can't put it into ZeroTrust easily, or, you get it all put in and then, you have to buy the technology, like you said, where it's going to run as root. It's going to need a service account. And, oh yeah, CFO doesn't care. We need this blinky box. It's hard because it seems like a lot of the decision makers will want something and then, they don't want to maintain it that way. So, you have to be prepared, I think, to answer those hard questions. And, I can automatically see where it'd be like, well, you're still going to need a VPN for these half a dozen systems, or, oh, we can't move these people over. They're just far too important.
And I think that's realistic. I think that's a challenge and a completely acceptable solution. You don't want to necessarily force something into an architecture that doesn't make sense for the way that it's used or for its life expectancy. If you know that system's going to be end of life in the next couple of years, okay, then fine. Start planning for its replacement with a solution that fits. But in the meantime, harden it where you can, isolate it where you can. Security as a whole is about leaving the environment better today than it was the day before. It's a little more secure, it's a little more robust, it's a little more resilient and able to recover in the event of an incident. We are as professionals, especially in this industry, I think we always chase perfection, but what really good security organizations look like is not a perfect environment where everybody sits around bored because, well, yep, we've secured it. There's no incidents, nobody's getting in. That doesn't exist. You're out there constantly looking for new ways to do what you're already doing better. And so develop your KPIs. Be like, hey, can we reduce mean time to recover? Can we reduce, mean time to detect? Can we harden the system a little bit more? And track those metrics, review them every quarter or whatever, and watch your progress, because it is iterative. And as those applications phase out or age out, they'll get replaced.
Right. Right. Yeah. And some of those legacy systems that are running on like, Windows NT or something, I mean, there are options like, P2V or something where you could virtualize those or convert those over into something that could be, better prepared or better protected against, you don't have to just have a tower machine sitting there running Windows NT or whatever. There are virtualization methods. You could probably go back to that company and ask them to upgrade to a containerized version, or, you could probably set it up in a jail or something like that in a Windows sandbox or something like that if that's the case. So that's pretty cool. I do like the KPIs and metrics though. You mentioned mean time to recover. That's nice. Talking to your business continuity and disaster recovery folks are going to love that kind of stuff if you can actually help them reduce that overall.
Well, and I think that's just sort of how you sell security to the business to begin with, is like, hey, we were able to prevent downtime more efficiently this quarter than we were 2 quarters ago. And so I look at metrics like, okay, do we have unmanaged devices on our network that we don't know about? Is that number going down? Are we getting those devices under management, or are we kicking off the ones that we don't want? What are you doing as far as mean time to patch? Are you getting patches pushed out within 30 days of when they're released? Or do you have patches still from 2007 that you haven't pushed? So you want to see that number shrinking. And I think that as long as you can show those kind of metrics, and especially show the trend, that's how you get the board to support the more complex solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you can implement ZeroTrust and say, before we had this in, we were spending, several thousand hours a year patching and, making sure that, Citrix wasn't going to fall over on us because of an O day, or, we're getting owned, and, we have less work. We've, saved thousands of hours, finding and helping to capture those metrics, not just metrics that you can, show in terms of vanity. Well, we processed, 8,000 more tickets this year. Stuff that is going to work for your C-level folks or for your managers to show in terms of savings. If you can show you save $15 million in man hours, then you can definitely impress people with that number.
Well, and you can barter some of that back to pay for some of the other projects you need, right?
Yeah.
And I think even making it not even so much about IT and not even so much about security, be like, hey, HR submitted 25% fewer tickets regarding connectivity issues because they no longer have to use the VPN. So they weren't wasting their time unable to connect to resources, and our IT team wasn't having to, like, that was that many fewer tickets we had to process.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, good point.
Mr. Betcher, do you have any other questions? Anything?
I don't understand, going all the way back to the beginning of this podcast, getting rid of VPN and the ZeroTrust that entails, because the reason for the VPN is so that you can be, your computer can be a part of the company's network and not, let's say it is compromised, let's assume it is. Once the VPN gets established, then that network connection to the attackers is no longer there, right? And
if
that's
you're
the
running a full tunnel.
Right.
Like, and so I think there's a couple of things there. Not every company that's running a VPN solution is doing the right kind of detection for like beaconing or filtering out malicious DNS. So even once you're back on the VPN, there's ways to get around that, and there's also ways to obfuscate traffic through things like DNS. Like you can send out malicious payload or malicious C2 traffic on. You can obfuscate it through ICMP traffic. You can obfuscate it through DNS. There's all kinds of different ways. So I don't think that the concept that just because you're on the VPN that you've got those network protections in front of you, while true, that doesn't necessarily mean there's not still stuff getting behind it.
Right.
Yeah. There's a lot of split tunnel traffics out there, where you're logging in, and unless you're interacting with the company assets directly, you're going outside, when you're surfing the web, you're using your own DNS for resolving and what have you. So,
well, and I think too that, split tunnel is a thing that so many people use because bandwidth is expensive,
Right.
and now that we've got companies of thousands of people and everybody's working remote, the size of the pipe that you need to support all of those VPN connections simultaneously, it's expensive.
Right.
And it requires bigger equipment.
That's true.
Yep.
I have found myself not needing to actually be on a VPN for the vast majority of what I do. Is that another option where, I mean, you don't have to be on the VPN, but a lot of the stuff that you're working with is, I don't know, based in Office 365 or, whatever. It's got a link to assets in your environment. So I'm not saying you should put your Jira, internet exposed, but the other day I was working at home and I'm typing on all these things and I was like, oh, I didn't even need to be on the VPN. And it's like, oh, I hit one thing and I was like, oh, okay, that's what I need the VPN for. Instead of, maybe there's an over reliance on just believing you actually need the VPN. If you only work on the same 15 spreadsheets per day and you can just, log in for 5 minutes on your VPN and upload whatever you need, or, you're using Office 365 and you have the OneDrive, cloud sync. Is there a need? Do we just assume because we're a business, we need a VPN? Maybe we don't even need a VPN to do work these days.
I wholeheartedly believe that personally. And, at work, I get on the VPN periodically, but it's because there is one specific resource that I need to access that we do choose to have behind a VPN. And you hear people talk about the crown jewels in IT, like know what your crown jewels are, put those in your most secure enclave. And for us, that's what we put behind our VPN, because that requires you've done your MFA, you've done your machine attestation. Now you've authenticated to the VPN as well. And the VPN has another layer of MFA. It just becomes this whole thing. I think that makes sense. But other than that, all of my workflow is done through things like SharePoint and my email client and my OneDrive. And I have been refreshingly surprised in the last year or two to see more and more companies go that route, especially because cloud services like G Drive or O365 or whatever make it very easy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're using O365, if you've got a private GitHub, if you're using, Jira's cloud servicey thing, whatever, a lot of this stuff doesn't need a VPN. And I would be interested to find out, or challenge your employees to find out how often they actually need to be on the VPN to actually do anything. I would imagine that a good majority of your employees don't need the VPN. And so if they don't need a VPN, do they need the ZeroTrust?
I think they do. I think that because you're still accessing sensitive assets, you're still accessing data, you're still interacting with applications or resources. So I think you still have to have that level of trust and device health and user authentication and everything else. You just don't have to have the burden of putting all of those resources on your corporate network and putting them behind the VPN.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. But so I'm thinking that ZeroTrust and VPNs are for and I'm maybe oversimplifying here, are for big organizations that have historically been using a VPN. If you're a startup, your Slack is not going to be needing a VPN. Or your Zoom is not going to need a VPN. There's a lot of things that in your environment or what you do on a regular basis will not require anything more than you having a login. So if you're in Office 365, you've got Office 365 credentials that are going to allow you to authenticate to those things without but
you're still going to have like your MFA tied to that potentially, or you're going to have like your hardware token. And then once you're logged in, if you want to access the finance SharePoint site, you may have additional controls there around what you can read or what you can access. So there's still that layers of security still come into play there. But I think that by taking us outside the perimeter, it forces you to actively think about the security around each asset, be it SharePoint, OneDrive, some third-party app, your finance app, your HR app, whatever. You actually do have to think about that versus just saying, well, once it's in the building, it's safe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was just wondering, if you don't have, people who, use those VPNs may have an actual file server sitting somewhere or sitting, in an environment. So
Make a plan to retire it.
right,
Move it to the cloud.
Move that to your OneDrives or whatever you have in Amazon, God forbid you're using an S3 bucket, but if you are using, set it up correctly. If you're using Google Compute, there's other things there, but I think before you even implement Zero Trust, you should look and see how much your employees actually need in terms of internal. What is internal these days? Zero Trust and VPNs are used to access internal, company stuff. There may be a whole group of people that don't even need to have a remote access tool. If the OneDrive client works for them and, they're, not authenticating to an internal SharePoint or not SharePoint, but like a Salesforce implementation or whatever, reducing the number of people's dependence on VPN or even your Zero Trust implementation may actually be one of the step zero in this case. Do you actually need to access internal resources, or are you just good enough with, your MFA and your O365 stuff? So that, is that a good line of thinking, or am I just completely hosing this whole thing up?
No, so I think I'll disagree with you a little bit. I think that I want to make a distinction that VPN and Zero Trust are not mutually exclusive, nor are they mutually inclusive of each other.
Right.
Zero Trust is a philosophy, it's a mindset, it's a style of architecting your solutions. Basically saying, don't trust anyone automatically, verify everyone, regardless of who they say they are, what equipment they say they are, verify everything. The VPN was sort of the only way we had to create that sort of safety in a historical context, and we as a society have moved past that. And if you're still in an environment with on-prem file servers or on-prem databases, your step zero in getting to Zero Trust architecture philosophies is, how do I get these databases into the cloud? How do I get these applications modernized to something that is more supportive, where it doesn't require that physical line of sight between the endpoint through the VPN to the database? Right. Chances are, if you're still running those kind of environments with all the on-prem servers, they're probably aging anyway, and it's a good time to have a hygiene discussion.
Right. Yep. Unless you're Oracle database, and then it's cheaper just to, yeet that into the sun and get something cheaper. So, yeah. Okay.
And get your file server off-prem. I feel like it's 2021. Yeah. Storage in the cloud is cheaper than ever. Move your file server to OneDrive and be done with it.
Yep. Or, if your government, Jedi probably has some kind of, solution for you there. But it's good to make that delineation, because I think there's a lot of folks that just assume that that a company needs a VPN, or they need to have those things, that remote access, when, maybe they've just, maybe that's just part of the best practice that they've had. And now that they've moved from, Mr. Betcher and I used to work for a company that had data centers, like physical, real data centers, one in Dallas and one in Pittsburgh. And, you needed the VPN to be able to access those things. And, but, maybe part of that renaissance that guy was talking about for InfoSec is, maybe remote access technologies, maybe we assume that we need them when we actually don't. So there may be.
I think that there's an interesting way to look at it. It's not so much that the VPN is different. The VPN was the way we established trust to access resources, right? Now it's Duo or whatever that's pinging you with a sign-on request. This is just the next iteration of that. And so you're still remotely accessing resources, because those resources aren't in your house. Exactly. They're in some Microsoft or AWS data center somewhere.
Yeah.
Instead, though, of having to go through the complexity and the latency issues and the performance impacts of going through a VPN tunnel, which was our best way of doing that for a long time, you're doing it through authentication.
Yeah. You're using a TLS connection over HTTP to be able to pull down your year-end review, docs, or your budget docs, or your spreadsheets or whatever. So, let me see. Was there anything else here? So, Some of the 5 pillars. We didn't even get into software-defined networking. That was a little hinky sounding to me with regards to that company they were talking about, where they were actually pushing out policy to computers. Is that a standard thing for every zero trust implementation, where you're actually modifying firewalls via API, or are there different ways of doing that?
I'm not going to say that it's standard necessarily, but I think having control of your endpoints is a standard need and a standard expectation of even I won't say a brand new zero trust implementation, but once you start to get a little bit of maturity, and once you've got sort of your user and asset management under control, you need to know that policy is applied. And especially now, because like GPO is hard to manage when you're dealing with devices that never have line of sight to the domain controller. So you definitely need to make sure that things like AB policy and AB updates are getting applied. You need to make sure that your sort of firewalls and any kind of other access control that you want to put on the device itself, any directories that need to be locked down, that stuff still needs to be maintained. And that goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago with, you have to have some kind of agent with that real-time visibility to the endpoint.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. I don't think I have anything else. Was there any comments, anything, Mr. Betcher, before we go?
No.
Okay. Yeah, everything's encrypted. Yeah. Here. So, Melissa, any last thoughts or anything you'd like to mention before we go?
I think that sort of parting words and the bottom line up front is that zero trust isn't nearly as scary as I think it sounds to a lot of people. It requires deliberate intent. It requires a culture change. It requires buy-in. And it requires admitting to yourself that maybe you need to go back to the basics and do some of the fundamentals of IT hygiene and asset management control that often get forgotten in as busy as we are in our various day jobs. But I think that it's completely attainable. And I think that as we come out of this year of COVID-19 and into remote work is kind of the norm for a lot of companies now, I think that this mindset is going to take hold. And I think it's definitely going to accelerate the adoption, and especially with, like you said, the executive order a week or two ago, this is the way forward.
Cool. Okay. All right. So, I appreciate you coming on. I think I got some of those questions that I needed answered from that other company that kind of left me hanging, but it was nice to be able to speak with somebody who could do that. I know we're not talking about what organization you work for, but it doesn't make sense. I mean, in your line of business, and I think this is probably the last question, does a company ever go, we want to implement zero trust, but we don't have the time to be able to dedicate our IT folks to it because they're over here doing 15 other things and making sure Citrix doesn't, ODay us up in this piece. Will companies come in and help you implement zero trust? And what is expected when they come in to do that?
You know what? If you are willing to pay for it, there's a company out there willing to sell you anything.
well, yes.
Yes. But I think you have to be careful because zero trust is a really sexy buzzword in security right now. So yes, there's companies that absolutely will come in and will tell you that, hey, we're going to install this tool, we're going to install this agent, we're going to do whatever, we're doing an audit of your AD environment. You want to make sure that what they're selling you, if they come to you and they say, I have this black blinky box that's going to solve all your problems, here, pay me $1 million and press go, I would scrutinize that a little bit. So if you're gonna outsource this and bring in a contractor or a consultant to do it, I think that's great, because there are people who have made this into a repeatable process and really do understand the basics that you need to lay the framework. But make sure your statement of work is well scoped and that your deliverables are well defined. If you don't want them to walk away by giving you a 20-page report of all the stuff you need to do when you're expecting them to actually do it. And if you're going to bring in that kind of consulting expertise, make sure that you have the buy-in from senior leadership, because that's a lot of wasted time, energy, and money on everyone's part if they're not ready to start down that path.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So now that we've opened that can, I actually do have another couple of questions.
Go ahead.
So when you're scoping these things, what are some of the questions you should be asking that company so that you can get a good idea of what you how do we know that you're actually going to do a good job for us? What are some of the things that we need to know from you to know that you're going to do a good job?
So I think that if it were me in this position, asking someone, how do I know that you're going to bring me a good deliverable with the ZeroTrust project? Have them identify in specifics what they're going, are they going to do an audit of permissions on just your file server? Are they only going to migrate files relative to, the business directories, or are they going to ignore email? Are they going to have them really scope exactly what they're going to deliver? Because if they're just going to come in and say, we're going to audit AD and we're going to move your file storage to the cloud and we're going to set up, MFA for your Azure accounts or whatever, great, but know that that's what you're getting and know that that's only phase one. I think having them break down sort of a roadmap of different phases and say, okay, what are you going to do about user management? What do you propose we do for asset management? What do you propose we do about our DevOps lifecycle? How do we implement, ask about the specific business unit cases that you're going to encounter. Lastly, I think that you should get a good, warm and fuzzy feeling that they understand your business objectives, because we hear this all the time that security is not the business. Security is there to enable the business. So your vendor needs to truly understand your business's objectives, their vision, their mission, and how they accomplish it. If that vendor isn't asking you about how your data flows and what your change management processes look like and what your access control curve, if they're not asking those deeply technical questions by the second or third consultation or project planning meeting, that tells me they're not going deep enough. And if they're not asking the questions, then they're not going to know how to help you fix it.
Okay. That's good to know. Yeah. I mean, if they're, like you said, just coming in, throwing boxes at people, that's not helpful. And the other thing I would say is probably request additional training, because, they're going to leave you with this and you're going to have to understand how everything works. If something goes pear-shaped, is there some kind of support contract? Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense too. So.
And I'll add to that. I think that another mark of someone who's really being a good steward of your time and your money is someone who can look at your current stack and say, I can leverage this and I can make this product work with this, and I can actually build in some orchestration here. If they can look at your existing stack and say, without spending any more tech dollars on software or dongles, we can actually implement pieces of this project, that's somebody I would have a greater amount of trust in.
Right. That'd be good. Okay. All right. Mr. Betcher, anything from you before we go?
No.
Cool. Okay. All right. Well, Melissa, I thank you for definitely coming on. For part one, everybody's heard your Twitter, and I'll make sure that it gets reiterated before we go. But where would people find you if they actually, are screaming, hey, we tried to implement ZeroTrust, it didn't work. Oh yeah, I heard Melissa on BreakSec and we need to talk to her. How would they get a hold of you?
So Twitter is definitely a super easy way to find me. Security Sphynx on Twitter. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'll post a link to my LinkedIn in the show notes.
Okay.
So feel free to reach out to me on there.
Excellent. Okay. And you said that some of the notes that you put in our show notes maybe worth a couple of talks at a conference. So I hope that we actually will see you at a conference. I think this would be a great discussion. Especially on how to implement this properly, and that I definitely see a lot of value in sharing this with a large crowd, not just us, but everyone else too. So
I look forward to it. I think this has the makings of maybe even a couple of talks on the topic, because you can go down some rabbit holes.
That's awesome. Okay. Cool. All right. Mr. Betcher, how would people find you, and what you're working on, and how would they find you on Twitter?
Yeah, LogMD, the log and malicious discovery tool, is what I work on, and you can go to the website log-md.com and get in touch with me there.
Okay. Miss Berlin is doing Hackers Health. She's been doing some recent painting sessions with folks using donated paint sets, of which, our nonprofit, the InfoSec Education Foundation, has been helping out with that. We're at the end of May, but it is Mental Health Awareness Month. So she's doing a lot of great work there. You can follow her on Twitter at InfoSister. You can also follow her nonprofit, Hackers Health. They're starting to set up in-person conference workshops where, you have the chill rooms and stuff like we did before the pandemic. So there's definitely conferences that are wanting to start a physical presence. So she's been talking with some to do that. I believe June at Far West Hacking Fest, they're going to be doing some work there. She also has a threat modeling, incident response tabletop system based off of it's called Detect and Defense. So it's kind of DND, Detect and Defense, but it's not that other one. So you can go and check all that out. Just hit her up on InfoSister and she'll advertise the other bits there. She's doing a lot of great work. She actually jokingly mentioned our logo. We're looking for a logo for InfoSec Campout 2021 and said she might be able to draw one for us. So I'm interested in seeing what she gives us because I'd love to get a logo, and I think she might actually have something original for us. But she's been doing some great work, some great sketches online. So I'm looking forward for that. So speaking of the conference, we are having our conference. We just sent out an email today about it, 27 to 29 August, which is the weekend before Labor Day here in the US. We're at a campground. We will have our Eventbrite up for that very soon. We're going to have a very limited number of tickets and people who are going to be able to join us. Obviously, we're still trying to get back into whatever normal will be coming up. But we will have speakers. We're going to be looking for people to come and speak. We're going to handpick some people as well as offer up a limited CFP here in the Seattle area. I have invited Melissa to come and join us if she really wants to, come and rough it with us. Roughing being half a mile from a Starbucks, in a town called Carnation, Washington.
For people in our industry, that is roughing it.
Yeah. Well, we the first year we did it, we had like 5 or 6 campsites that didn't have power, and then we picked up like 4 or 5 that had RV hookups or whatever. This year I just reserved pretty much all of the RV spots, so we have power, 40 amp hookup. We're trying to really be roughing it there, but so we have power and water, RV hookups if you want to bring an RV, and we'll have more information about that as we're coming along. But you can follow the Twitter handle is very low traffic InfoSec Campout. You can follow the podcast at Breaksec, BRAKESEC, and you can follow me on Twitter. I'm Brian Break. So there you go. We have a Patreon. We appreciate all of our supporters there to help offset the costs of, maintaining community, paying costs for the Zooms and the hosting at Libsyn, and, just generally being awesome people and believing in us and supporting what we're doing here and trying to educate people and help out where we can. So we appreciate all their help. And that was it for this week. Melissa, again, thank you so much for coming. If you, put out a blog post or, maybe your company, feels the need to pass the plate and wants to help out Breaksec, we would love to have you come back again in a sponsored segment. We're not against that, but we appreciate your time and coming on.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Fantastic. All right. That was it for Breaking Down Security this week. Have a great week. Be kind to one another, wear your masks, get your vaccines, because I want to give you a big old awkward hug like Jay Street would do. Getting those shots and masking up takes care of you, and because, taking care of yourself is important because you're the only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.